Well, I'm back in the hot tub talking about conservatives and people who suffer from conservative thoughts. I recently attended a public hearing where I was hoping to announce to the public that I'm an urbanist and that I support things like bicycle lanes and narrowed streets and wide sidewalks and infrastructure for people to get from where they are to where they want to be. Urbanism is a movement online mostly that you can get involved with in your hometown through an organization in the United States called Strong Towns. Now, in civilized countries like Europe, they don't have strong towns. They just build communities that work. But here in the United States, we have to have a special group of progressively minded people who actually try to make cities function well for everybody, not just elites. When I say elites, I'm not talking about what conservatives think are the elites. I'm talking about people that have money and want to reap the benefits of an unjust system, mainly conservatives. So I'm at this public hearing, and I'm talking about how we need to have at least 4 different ways for you to get from your front door to the front door of wherever you're trying to get to. There should be adequate walking infrastructure. There should be ample biking infrastructure. There should be motor vehicle infrastructure that includes buses, and there should be train infrastructure. All 4 of those should be readily available to you, and you shouldn't have to check a schedule. You just walk out your front door, and a bus comes along. Maybe you have to walk a block or 2, but probably just a block, and then there's a bus, and it picks you up, or there's a train, and it picks you up, or a trolley, or a streetcar, or whatever. Or the biking infrastructure is similar to, at least in North America, what we see for motor vehicles. It goes everywhere, separate from motor vehicles so that it's actually safe for bikers. And those paths can also be used for walking. Or you can, and I think probably you should, have separate walking paths as well that are separate from motor vehicles and distinct. This would make transportation adequate for everyone, available to everyone, safe for everyone, and frequent. Well, after I went on my tirade, the head of this public speaking thing, it was like one of the folks that works for the city of Denver who does these sort of neighborhood improvements, looked a little bit impressed, which I was very proud of. And then started talking about, okay, well, here's what we are going to do in this neighborhood. Now, I had actually met one of my friends at this public hearing, and she is, secular, and she claims to be a humanist, and she is very progressive, or thinks she is. And after the public servant finished their presentation about how they were going to improve this street in their neighborhood, they were going to add some bike lanes and get rid of some parking and widen the sidewalk and narrow the lanes to slow down traffic and so on. And they were going to increase busing frequency to get people to and from. My friend went to go vote. We all got a chance to vote. And it was essentially, it wasn't like a proper vote, but it was like a public hearing vote. It was like, here's a piece of paper, fill out what you think should be the best solution based on these options. And like I said, I had given my little speech or whatever. She didn't give a speech, but we were sitting there and we were filling out our pieces of paper, and I noticed that she was actually voting against this improvement, specifically the parking, but she was voting against it. She didn't want them to take away the parking. In fact, she wanted more parking, which if you know anything about urbanism, the more parking is not always the merrier. Now, I have a certain bend on this that you can come to understand and know through my other content. I publish a show called Urbanist Snark, where I get into all of urbanism and city design and planning, and you can go to YouTube and you can follow me there and understand my thoughts on urbanism. But generally speaking, when I go to these public hearings, I pick the most progressive option, which is the one that is the most change. It's always take away parking here and add biking there and increase transit frequency and so on. And I noticed that she was voting for the least progressive option, and she was actually voting to poo-poo the idea altogether. And I said to her, hey, let's call her Jessica. I said, Jessica, just give me a second to explain this to you because I don't think you understand what this means. And I explained the whole thing to her. I explained to her how increased busing and more biking would lead to more parking, even if they take away certain parking spots, because less people would be driving to this location and more people would be walking, biking, and taking the bus to get to this location. And so there won't need to be that much parking. And this is what the neighborhood has decided is their plan to improve themselves. This is what these people want. And by the way, we didn't live in this neighborhood. We were just associated with this neighborhood through a mutual organization that we're both members of. That organization is located in this neighborhood, but none of us lived in this neighborhood. And I was voting, of course, to improve the neighborhood as much as possible. And I was trying to explain to her how she should vote this way too. And what she did next just completely baffled and floored me. This self-proclaimed skeptic, humanist, secularist, who considers herself progressive, went into a racist and bigoted tirade, explaining to me that, why do you care about this neighborhood? She said, these are all just Catholics anyway. Most of them are Latino. And besides, we're probably not even going to be in this neighborhood in 5 years. And she was talking about the organization that we were all members of. But those were the reasons she gave me. She didn't talk about anything other than the fact that there were a lot of Catholic people in this neighborhood, that there were a lot of Latino people or Hispanic people in this neighborhood, and that we weren't even really going to be in this neighborhood, so so fuck them, essentially. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How is this person considering themselves a humanist if they don't give a shit about humanity? I pushed back. I told her how ignorant I thought she was being. I couldn't believe that she was going into a racist tirade. I said all those things. She still didn't back down from it, and so I walked out. I had to leave. It turns out I came back later. I just brought some of those forms with me and passed them out to the different small businesses that were in that area that wanted to vote for this but couldn't because they had to work. So I brought probably a dozen of these forms out to the different people that were working in these businesses, and they were very happy to fill out those forms. And then I went and collected them and brought them back and deposited them into the little ballot box thing that the public hearing, the whole point of the hearing was to get this information. But this really changed my perception of Jessica. I couldn't believe what she had said. And since that day, I've changed my relationship with Jessica. I don't associate with her anymore. Now, there are some loose ends that need to be tied up. I can't just completely disassociate from her, but I can't be friends with somebody who thinks that way about Catholics and Latinos and who thinks this way about her community. We're both members of a community organization, and apparently that organization and its members doesn't give a shit about the community. Now, I guess I'm the exception, but I'm probably not even going to be a member of that organization moving forward. She's one of the board members. Quite a few other board members were there as well, and they also took her side on this. Now, they didn't go into a racist tirade, but they had other issues with the taking away parking that they expressed. And I mean, boy, were they unwavering in their dedication to their bullshit. They had no idea what urbanism is or what progressivism is. They're definitely not humanists. But this is one of those examples that it's not a conservative person, but they're suffering from conservative thoughts. And this is suffering. If you're generally a progressive person, but you have racist thoughts and beliefs, or you just sort of don't care about certain groups in society or certain neighborhoods or certain communities, that's a suffering of some kind. And it's a conservative suffering. That's tribalistic. Now, the group that I'm associated with is a secular group, and so we have a fair amount of people who are recovering from their former religious beliefs, and some of them are angry. It's not very uncommon for somebody who has deconstructed their religious beliefs or, gotten out of their religious groups to feel angry towards the members of their religious group or their former friends and relatives and social network because they were lied to. And so it's just not uncommon. But as a progressive, as somebody who cares about humanity, that anger can't be projected out into society in a meaningful way. You're not going to make a community better by being bigoted towards it and stifling their progress. Now, during this tirade, I had brought up, I said, well, you're acting like Latino, Hispanic people and Catholics don't think secular thoughts and don't have secular questions or don't have questions that can be answered through science and the scientific method and a secular worldview. And this made her pause for a second. I think that was the one thing I said in response to her that actually got through a little bit. And she kind of looked at me like, oh, yeah, that is right, probably. But then she just went right back into, well, we're not even going to be here in 5 years, so what do we care? But not caring about a group of people is conservative. Abandoning groups of people because of whatever reason, in this case, it's because they were religious, because they were Latino, Hispanic, that's conservative. That's something a conservative would say. That's suffering from conservative ideas and thoughts. And by the way, this person is a progressive in most senses of the word. If you were to talk to her and she were to express her views to you, 95% of what she said you would identify as progressive. That's how she votes, that's how she generally thinks, and so on. But in certain instances and in certain cases, she suffers from conservative thoughts. And in this case, when I tried to explain to her how urbanism and how improving community spaces like streets and roads and making them more in line with urbanist worldview and the progressive urbanist movement makes the community a better place to be and would benefit her and benefit the organization that we are both members of that is in this community, it would benefit us as well. She went into this racist tirade. So she's very clearly suffering. And I've said it in other episodes and I'll say it again. At a certain age, you have to have dealt with these emotions and thoughts to the point where you are self-aware and you have to have a strategy for overcoming them. The people that live in the community where we went to this public hearing, it's not their problem that you're a bigot, but you're making it their problem by the way that you vote. Even if you're progressive, if you have some reason why you're poo-pooing the betterment of a community, you're not acting in a humane way. And that's very conservative. Now that leads me to my conclusion for this episode. And I'm going to end this episode with a question. Should you continue to be friends with people who suffer from conservative thoughts or who are in fact conservatives? And that's a really difficult question to answer. I have recently gone through a complete overhaul of my social network. Every single friend that I've had from my past, I've moved on from. Mostly due to conservative ideas and thoughts and feelings, much like we heard from Jessica. This story, this anecdote that I'm telling you now, is the reason why I moved on from my friendship with Jessica. I don't generally associate with her anymore, even though we're still members of some of the same groups. But what should you do? If you find yourself wanting to be more progressive and doing the work, right? You're reflecting on your own issues, you're self-aware, and you're doing things to be more self-aware, to learn more about yourself and who you are and why you are the way you are, and doing the work, the cognitive behavioral therapy to actually get through these negative emotions towards groups of people and to come out the other side a more social person and somebody who could consider themselves a humanist and a secularist and a progressive, then you have to ask yourself, how many people like this do you want in your life? How many, for instance, people who think capital punishment is a viable solution to society's problems? Or how many people who would throw Latino, Hispanic Catholics under the bus seemingly just out of spite? Or how many people who are just completely scientifically illiterate and think, they can just make up answers to questions, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I was talking to Mario, who thought he had his own, he could just tell his own story about how the Big Bang occurred and what happened at the beginning of all time and space. Now, he never got into his answer. I suspect it was a Christian answer, but how many of those kinds of people do you want in your life? I mean, how much bullshit are you willing to go through? And how useful are these folks? Can you really take the advice of somebody who has these conservative thoughts and who thinks in this inhumane way? Is it really safe to bring your problems to them and see what they think you should do? And then how long before they throw you under the bus? How long before you're mistreated? Inhumane people tend to be inhumane to everybody. They don't just pick, in this case it was Latino Hispanics or whatever, but they don't just pick certain groups of people. Once you dehumanize one group, it's much, much easier to dehumanize any group. But this question gets even harder if you're in any way socially isolated or socially awkward, or if you don't have great social skills, or if we're talking about not just your friends, but your family or your entire social network. I can't tell you how difficult it's been for me to actually move on from my entire social network. I mean, essentially, I have no friends right now. And all of my family members, I've moved on from them too, and for the exact same reasons. Now, I preach being cooperative and getting people through their conservative thoughts to the other side, but at some point, I just had to cut out toxic people from my life and start again fresh. I had tried everything I could think of. I'd been pushing back against this sentiment and these conservative ideas for years and years and years, sometimes decades with some of the folks in my life. And, at some time, at some point, you just have to move on. You've heard your last argument for anti-Semitism, or you've heard your last story for how the universe came into being, or you've heard your last inhumane thing spoken. You've heard your last hate speech. So what do you do? So do you move on, or do you stay in the pocket and try to convince people, try to educate people, try to encourage people to be humane? I don't know the answer to that exactly. I know what I did. Like I said, I moved on. I moved on from all my friends, and I'm now seeking out more friends, different friends. Now, I don't have a lot of social inadequacies, so I'm pretty socially smooth, or I'm pretty socially apt. So I'm able to make friends relatively easily. But I got to be honest with you, it's been really hard because most people, most of the time, don't want any new friends. They want acquaintances at best. And this is going to sound weird maybe to some of you, but almost nobody wants to be friends with a 40-something man. If you're a 40-something man, most people just assume you're creepy no matter what you're like, no matter what you do, no matter what you say. You fit the description of everything wrong with the world right now, and so you're probably not going to get anywhere. Now, I generally don't get treated like I'm creepy. People are still quite gracious for the most part, but it is going to be difficult once you move on, if you decide to move on. And again, I can't tell you what the answer is. I chose to move on for reasons that seemed very clear to me. And for the most part, to be quite fair and honest, the people in my life also moved on. They either identified themselves as not really my friends, or not wanting to remain friends, or in some cases, it had nothing to do with me. They just had more things in their life than they could handle. Their kids were getting of the right age where they needed their attention more often. Their husbands and wives needed their attention. Their other family members needed their attention, and they weren't willing to maintain a friendship with me. So a lot of people self-identified that I should just move on from them. Now, other people lost their minds to the QAnon cult and became insane with right-wing nonsense and conservatism and bloodlust. And still other people were just mean and cruel. And I was sick of it. I was done being friends with people that were like that. But what is the answer? I mean, when I moved on from all of my family members, that was largely just due to indifference from them. And the very few people that I still associate with from my family, they're not really that important to me right now because they don't seem to want to be. They don't seem to want to be a part of my life. Like I said, it's mostly indifference. Now, there are some abusive people still in my life that I'm trying to get rid of, but it's not as easy when it's your family. One thing I can tell you is that once you do come out the other side, once you do rid yourself of all these people, this negative influence, the conservative thinkers, the conspiracy theorists, the folks that call for, more guards at the border, or the folks that have a group of people that they hate, and they feel perfectly comfortable speaking about their hate and trying to propagate their hate. And I know when I say that, you're thinking maybe Tucker Carlson, or you're thinking maybe Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan, or the people that, it's really animated the way that they hate. Or, maybe you're thinking Steven Crowder. But I'm not talking about pundits and public figures. I'm talking about people conversations you're having at your dinner table or over the phone with your friends. When I hear people from my life talking about who cares about Latino neighborhoods or Black Lives Matter protesters, and they're dehumanizing people and they're calling for violence and things like that, or they're just, like my friend Jessica, just going on this weird racist tirade and calling me out, saying, why do you care about Catholics? Why do you care about Hispanics? That's hate. And it's this sort of palatable hate that we hear often. And we accept in other people, and we think, oh, they probably don't really think that way, or we deny it altogether and say, well, they're not really like that, or I'm sure they didn't mean it, or whatever. We just hand wave it away. But I can tell you, when you are rid of those people, when those people are no longer in your life anymore, there's a real weight that's lifted, because you know that you never have to go through one of those conversations again where you're now forced to be confronted with somebody else's bigotry and hatred. And that's incredibly liberating. That makes you feel better about your next interaction. Now, as you go out into the world and try to find new people to associate with, I can't guarantee you, of course, that you're going to meet good people. In fact, I think it's much more likely that you'll meet bad people, especially if you live in North America. especially if you're a progressive in the same way I am, who's a humanist, who cares about society and community. I think it's much more likely that you're going to meet bad people. But at the very least, you can start afresh with each new person. And if you are confronted with bigotry or hate, then you don't have to continue. You don't have a lot of time invested. And that's also very liberating. You can easily divest from that situation and move on to the next person. Whereas that's not the case with people that have been in your life for a really long period of time, or people that you have a lot of time and money and energy and friendship invested in. But I can tell you, and I just want to reiterate this, if you do decide to move on from your friends and family due to their bigoted ideas, or due to the fact that you've been enlightened to a point where even the smallest inhumane infraction is an offense to your moral system and your moral sensibilities, when you do get free of the folks that are like that in your life, even the folks that have been in your life for a really long period of time, there is a certain weight that lifts. There is a certain light at the end of the tunnel. You do get to start fresh. And the outcome, the future, there's good reason to be optimistic. There's good reasons to think that you'll find good people at the next thing you go to. Thank you for listening to the Hot Tub Monologues.